Welcome to Adapted, the podcast where we explore adaptations of various forms. I'm today's host, Tom, and with me is.
Matt?
And KJ.
Today we'll be discussing the video game Super Mario Bros. From 1985 and its movie adaptation, Super Mario Bros. From 1993, and another of its movie adaptations, the Super Mario Bros. Movie from 2023.
Super Mario Brothers, one of the most famous games. I'm sure you've all played it, or at least seen it, or certainly know somebody who played it. Came out in 1985 for the Famicom, which is the NES in Japan, and then eventually on the NES everywhere else in the world. Created by Miyamoto, where he has famously put this game together that has the vocabulary of how to play built into it. You don't even realize you're learning how to play with the blocks above you, the enemies below you. Oh, I must jump. It's a gorgeously put together game. One of the first games that had smooth side scrolling. I could go on and on and on. So we are starting with that Super Mario Brothers. We're including all the rest: Super Mario Brothers 2, Super Mario Brothers 3, World, 64, Galaxy, Sunshine, Odyssey, any Mario game, Kart, all the sports games, all of those.
What about the one with the hat? What's that one?
That was Mario Odyssey on the Switch.
Yes.
Very
that was
fun,
Odyssey, okay.
and tons of callbacks to the old
Mario
games.
Paint.
Mario Paint. We should absolutely include Mario Paint.
I played the Mario one that where they go. It's like the Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego version where they have to like go around.
Mario's
I
missing.
played that one. I played that.
Yeah.
I also played the one where Bowser's the hotel manager. I played that one.
Oh, wow.
A bunch of them.
Hotel
Yeah,
Mario.
I played them. Yeah, I
Really?
played that one.
Do you know where? Because I think that was a Philips CDI game.
Yeah, we played it it was on a PC, I think, right?
Wow.
Would it have been on a PC?
I thought it was Philips CDI, but maybe it was
I don't know
emulated.
what it was on. It was my neighbor had it, and
That's wild.
we played it, and it was. I don't know what we were supposed to do. I have no idea what was going on.
Is that the one where you close the hotel doors? Like there's
yeah,
like
it was
like
I
a
just
hotel in a
remember there was-
tree, right? And,
Yeah, it made no sense whatsoever, but we tried to play it and then just gave up.
So we're talking about all the games and two of its adaptations, including the 1993 Super Mario Brothers movie with Bob Hopkins, John Leguizamo, Dennis Hopper. Oh, a rough movie, audience. And the more recent 2023 movie, The Super Mario Brothers, the animated film by Illumination, the company that does Sing 2, which I really liked, The Minions. And we're going to look at what they adapted, what they didn't adapt, and we're going to have a broader conversation on what it means to adapt a video game.
Let's start by talking about the relative merits, I think, of these movies, and we could talk it through the frame of what they've actually taken from the Super Mario Brothers games. It seems like with the first one, not very much, other than there's a Bowser, there's a Super Mario, there's a Luigi Mario, and there's a princess of sorts.
I think there's a surprisingly large amount they actually took. If you, especially there's a number of references to the games too directly in there. I think there's a surprisingly large amount they took. But anyway, keep going.
Oh, that's news to me because the other thing would be like the mushrooms and then Bertha, right? That large woman who has the diamond, who's a reference to the fish, I think, at one point. Are there I guess you could jump high with the boots. I don't know. It's kind of a mess of a movie, but it didn't seem to be. Maybe there's a lot of references in there, and this kind of tissue of illusion, which I didn't catch a lot of them. But what they didn't seem to take was the tone, the tone or the atmosphere. The movie is very much, it very much feels like it wants to be like a PG-13 movie, but has to be in this PG box because of who the audience is presumably going to be, children. But it doesn't seem to know that or know how to deal with that. It's it's a rough experience. But how much are they really taking from the games? I guess there's the toads, right? The Goombas are in there.
Yeah, I mean this is what I think they were trying to do. What I initially thought the main complaint, because I know this movie is infamously bad and I hadn't seen it. I thought the main complaint was that basically it was like, oh, it has nothing to do with the games. It's just Mario, and it is really weird. Like why they I don't know why they made the, you know, Koopa just a dude. It just doesn't make much sense. Like it's just Dennis Hopper. Like, why didn't you bother to make him a dinosaur? Like, why didn't they at least something? But I think they do in the sense I think my gut says what they were trying to do was something that a lot of movies would do, especially in the 2000s, which was to take sort of classic fairy tale stories and make them dark, add these sort of dark elements to them, and explore the other sides of them, and that's the Snow White and the Huntsman kind of thing. Like that was a trend that definitely was underway, and I think they were just really early participants in that. That's what my gut says what they were trying to do. So they basically, I think, said, okay, well, it's not gonna be a mushroom kingdom, but it's gonna be a fungus kingdom. They were trying to find ways to sort of make it darker, and so that's why Toad isn't just like a weird little cartoony figure. He's a human being who's been sort of, transformed into this monstrosity, and they were just trying to find, I think, ways to do that completely ineptly, though. That's the problem. It the script is so bad. It makes no sense. There's just huge chunks of it that are just massive plot holes that they're just completely unexplained. My favorite is when, for some reason, they have this de-evolution or this evolution, yeah, de-evolution
Mhm.
machine, and they shove Koopa into it at one point, like Luigi and Mario do, and de-evolve him, which made, first I'm like, well, there's people all around. Why doesn't anybody kill them? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, they just let him put him in there, roll this machine down. Like, I don't really get it. But then they de-evolve him, and nothing happened to him, though.
Well, to defend this movie, he wasn't in there very long, and when he comes out, his eyes go reptilian for an instant.
Yeah, but
Everybody,
then they never did anything with
no, yeah,
that.
it
Like,
went
why didn't
nowhere.
they bother? Why bother having that sequence in there if you weren't going to do something with it?
Yeah.
There's just a lot of stuff like that, like all over, where you're just, it couldn't quite, it just feels very schizophrenic. Like, it feels like essentially the directors just didn't know what to do with it, and they couldn't settle on they couldn't settle on a direction for it. So it's more, I thought it was just people didn't like it because it messed with Mario and canon. It's more because I mean, it does do that, but it's also totally and utterly inept in terms of its execution. That's its biggest flaw. Maybe if you'd pulled this thing off, this could have been like an early weird version of the Matrix or something. Like if you had probably really competent people working on it, it potentially could have worked. I think there's an element to it that could work, but it's just its problem is it just makes no sense. Like, why is it when Koopa dies that the king suddenly turns from fungus back into a king? It wasn't like a magic spell. It was supposed to be like a thing, and it was just like, why did that happen? It was just all this stuff. But my favorite moment that I think was totally a reference, and I loved it, is at the very end. Koopa's fighting them, and he gets into this like bucket thing that he's floating on, and I'm like, oh, that's totally they're taking that from Super Mario World, where at the end, but Koopa's fighting you, or in this giant like floating smiley face thing that's like, I'm like,
Yep.
oh, it's clearly that bucket. Like it was clear, so they definitely took stuff from them and tried to sort of imagine it in a gritty new world. It's just massively, massively incompetently executed.
Yeah, a lot of it doesn't make sense. And the world is also a mix of like Blade Runners, California, and I and I don't know what like a more magical, or it's not a friendly place, but I guess it's like it's a sort of a pan type, um what would you call it? A pan type like atmosphere or tone, but in a world that looks like Blade Runner. And so there's this kind of clash of tones and clash of worlds too, where this kind of children's movie is in this like really, really dark space. And as you're saying, Pat, maybe that's what they were going for, kind of darkening fairy tales, but it's also very silly. Like there's nothing dark about Mario or Luigi's means of solving problems. It has that kind of supposedly warm spirit, but the warm spirit doesn't go anywhere because they're in this kind of uh, really dark world. I do would say the de-evolution gun is a pretty terrifying weapon. I think of all
Except
of
only
like
it's used once and everyone just watches and then laughs at the man.
Yeah.
They do not appreciate the horror of the
Yeah.
situation.
Oh, and they never do anything with the whatever happens to the two guys who get evolved. So they're very smart.
Did you not watch to the end of the credits?
Oh God, I didn't know. What
Oh
happens to
my
them at the end of the
goodness,
credits?
there's of course a hidden scene at the end
There's a
of it.
post-credit scene.
Yeah,
I
of
watched the other
course.
movie to the end of the
How
credits.
could you
So what
not?
happens? What happens to them?
They get approached by, so the ends with these two Japanese guys, sitting there, and you can't see whom they're speaking to, and they're saying, "We would like to purchase the rights to your story because you have been through so many great adventures, and we would like to be able to make a video game based on
Uh,
your adventures." And of course, you think it's going to be Mario and Luigi, and then they show the two of them sitting on a couch, being like, "Oh yes, we will." They're also terrible actors. Yeah,
mhm.
yes, we will totally tell you. And and that's.
Oh, I missed that.
They sell their rights to Nintendo. It's
Hmm.
Nintendo.
Oh, it's an origin story. Mhm.
So they were an interesting adaptation choice, right? They don't really come from the games at all. Their names, I guess, are in Mario 3, where Bowser has a bunch of kids in it. I think Iggy and Spike are two of the names of the kids from Mario
They're
3.
also in. I think they're in Super Mario World, aren't they? They're a couple of the ones that are in the castles.
Yes, yep. Yeah, am I mixing up 3 in World? I might be mixing up 3 in World. But right, they're Bowser's kids. Um, but nowhere in well, all right, let's also say before this movie came out, by my count, there were 7 Mario games they had to draw from. And when they started writing the script, it was probably closer to 5, maybe 4. So there's also not a lot of lore that they have to draw from unless they're reading the comics and stuff that came out in Japan. But where did Iggy and Spike come from? Right? They're kind of a strange character to throw into this story.
I guess they needed buffoon
Like
sidekicks.
henchmen? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, their role in the plot is to, I guess, really, spark whatever conflict. Because they're the ones that kidnapped the princess,
Yeah, they
right?
have to kidnap the
Yeah.
women. Yeah.
So they're the one, yeah, all the women, all the women from
Oh, yeah.
Brooklyn. Yeah, the chorus, the Greek chorus of them. Um, yeah, but I guess they're just kind of normal goons that do things for the villain. But they turn out to be good guys, right? Aren't they actually secretly
Once they
working?
become smart, then for some reason they
Yeah.
start spouting marks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Marx and in French, French Enlightenment,
Yeah,
like
stuff. Yeah.
Rousseau and.
But I couldn't figure out if they rebelled after they became smart or they were always rebelling and it wasn't very clear, but I don't know how important it was
They
either.
do say they've always been rebelling, but there is
Yeah.
no indication of them rebelling until they've been evolved.
Yeah, and what did they do actually to help the rebellion? Did they is
Think
there
we
a
are far too into the weeds in this.
Okay.
I
Um,
don't. Yoshi was cool. Yoshi was
yeah,
actually
Yoshi
really
looked
cool.
good.
I liked
Mhm.
Yoshi.
Yoshi was amazing. I've heard on other podcasts they say it is the best dinosaur. It is the best dinosaur on film for like 3 months until Jurassic Park comes out.
But it's a shockingly good.
Yeah, it
It's a
looks yeah.
shocker given how
Yeah.
everything else looks like garbage. It's really
Mhm.
quite good effect.
Yeah. It actually probably looked more like the actual Velociraptor than the ones in Jurassic Park.
I
Yeah.
just think like the little tiny heads that are just like
Mhm.
they must have been walking around on the set and people must have been like, shoot. This movie's gonna be really bad. We got a big
Yeah.
problem on our hands. I saw a quote from Dennis Hopper. And apparently when his kids one of his kid, he had like a kid who was like 6 years old at the time, and the kid saw the movie and went, Dad, why did you make that awful movie? And he went, so you can have shoes, son. And he went, I don't need shoes that bad, Dad.
Uh,
So here's a
yeah.
question for you guys. If this wasn't based on Mario and it was just a sci-fi film based on a society that evolved from dinosaurs and there was kind of this meeting of worlds, do you think it could have worked as a movie?
It didn't work as a movie now, and we had something to work. It would have been better because it would have never been greenlit, right? And nobody would have made this because there wasn't a tie into Mario.
Yeah, it's almost like it's got like kind of a Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger does that with like the underground lizard people. Like there was previously a race of intelligent lizard people, and humans evolved. There's definitely a trope that sort of that uses that. In this thing again, I don't. Could you have made a good movie with this material? Not likely. Could you have made a serviceable film? Yeah. I mean, it almost has like a Troll 2 feel to it in some ways. Where Troll 2 is just it's why have this weird detail where the goblins are vegetarians and they have to turn people to vegetable. Like, I don't know if you've seen that movie. It's one of those also like really bad movies. But it's just that concept of like, why did you include this Zorro element? Like, it doesn't do anything for the plot really. So there's a lot of the movie just has those kind of elements where it's like these elements just don't make any sense and they're so poorly stitched together and none of it is useful to telling the story. It's just you could have replaced all of this with any other generic element and it would have just been the same story essentially. So it it does it's an example of just inept storytelling is what it is, regardless of its source material, which it does technically have some of the source material there. And again, I think there is more than I thought there was going to be, but it's inept.
And I guess that brings us to the 2023 one.
Sure.
Want to talk
So
about that?
yeah, I just want to throw out. So we mentioned again, by my count, there were 7 Mario games to draw from before the 1993 one. By my count, there were 77 Mario games that they could draw from for the 2023 film. And Nintendo was
And Donkey
heavily.
Kong, if we're
And
including Donkey
yeah.
Kong, all the Donkey Kong World games too.
Hmm.
Like Diddy Kong and the
Old
Cranky Kong
Donkey.
are all, yeah, Cranky Kong and Diddy Kong are all from Donkey Kong World or whatever that one was called.
Yeah, I didn't include those in the count. Because then it would be like 15 Mario games before the 1993 one. But I thought that was kind of inaccurate. But doesn't matter.
Well, the Donkey Kong doesn't figure at all in the
And the
in the
other one.
93 one. They didn't bother to include that element.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, Mario was in them, but
True.
Mhm.
but yeah, and Nintendo was heavily involved. Like, I believe this movie was announced during a Nintendo Direct. A Nintendo Direct is Nintendo periodically, maybe 6 times a year, have release a video with kind of their updates on upcoming games or updates on games that are about to be released. And during one of those, I'm pretty sure was when the Mario movie was announced. So they were lockstep with Illumination, I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure.
Miyamoto is a producer on it, isn't he?
Yeah, I believe Miyamoto was. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
He is, but
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily
Translate into something. Yeah, but they were kind of offhand, right? With the 93 one, they weren't
Yeah,
involved in it.
correct. I believe they just handed it to Hollywood and then said, "We're never making a film again." So,
I think they thought that it was, again, I think there was sort of an idea of like, let's see what other people can do with it. Like, let's give creative people opportunities to work with this material. And I think they thought that, and Mario was a strong enough intellectual property and character that he could kind of take that beating. If it was bad, it just got rejected. I think they thought that it would be an opportunity for people to shine. It seems to be a philosophy at Nintendo, from what I can get from
Hmm.
reading this book, that they often do that. They try to encourage creativity in this kind of stuff. And I think they thought like, hey, let's see if we can catch lightning in a bottle. And they did not catch
Did
lightning.
not. Yeah, because they had the earlier movie, which is also mentioned in the book.
The book is Super Mario: How Nintendo Conquered America by Jeff Ryan.
Hmm.
It's actually pretty
and
interesting.
when was that
Yeah.
written? Or when was that
2011.
published? Okay.
Pretty much everything in it was stuff I knew. Like I'd heard it all, and I've again, like I think I'm pretty well versed in gaming history. I've got a pretty good knowledge of it. So there was nothing earth shattering in it. It has some odd interpretations and some weird kind of pop philosophy psychology that he kind of inserts in there. But for the most part, it's a pretty good book. It's a good story actually.
Yeah, but he does mention at one point, speaking to your idea of like allowing people to kind of be creative, bit, a little bit of independence. Another thing that might factor into this movie was the 1989 movie The Wizard, which was a movie with Fred Savage that was about a group of young people. I don't think they were teenagers, they were preteens
They're very yeah.
going to play um, going to take their, I think, autistic brother to a video game match. I'm not entirely sure what his handicap was, but I think he is handicapped in some way. But he's like a Rain Man sort with video games, and that was how they premiered Super Mario Brothers 3. That turns out to be the game of the contest. Um, and I think that movie was fairly successful for what it was. And it seemed like that worked for them, and maybe this would work as well, as kind of not only a new means of spreading that intellectual property around, but also as a sort of advertisement for the company.
But the new one, I think the new one though, getting to that one, it's intriguing. Like it's fun. My kids saw it, and they're 4 and 5, and they liked it. And there's nothing, and they know nothing about Mario. They've never played a game. They've never seen it, so they liked it completely as a standalone film. They know nothing about the source material. I was listening to the book in the car, and they basically were like, "Is this a book about that movie?" I'm like,
Mhm.
this is you've got a very weird sense of
Mhm.
time. But no, they've never seen it. They've never done it. So for them, so it clearly 100% stands on its own. They got it. They play Bowser's Castle. They have no knowledge of the games, and the movie completely 100% stands on its own quite successfully. Um, it's not my kind of film. It's a little too, even for a kids movie. They're very shouty. I don't know why. I know I sound like an old man. They're very shouty and they're very loud and they're very. I'm like, why are you yelling at me?
Mhm.
I don't quite get that. Um,
Where's
but,
my cane?
I do feel like I'm old, but I just feel like you watch like I watch a lot of kids movies. We watch a lot of the old Disney movies, and I never felt like they were yelling at me. This one definitely feels like it's yelling at me, um, but it's fine. They had some moments that did make me legitimately laugh. The blue shell moment made me laugh. That is a very, very funny joke. Um, like I enjoyed that.
I thought the star made me laugh. The
The stuff
existential
is also
star.
funny.
What is that a reference to?
I didn't get that reference either, but I thought it was really funny.
Mhm.
There are something similar to that guy in the Mario Galaxy games, but they don't talk or like they don't. I don't think they're. I don't think they're dreading like that guy was.
Yeah, for the audience, there's at one point Luigi's imprisoned, and he's imprisoned next to like a anthropomorphic blue star that has a cutesy voice, but it is like completely in love with death and existentialism. Um, it's a yeah that
The
detail.
only release is the sweet, like sweet death. Like it is. It's very.
It's really funny. Yeah, um, yeah. It is shouty as you say. It's also not that. I didn't. I think it does stand on its own as a movie, and I think the movie is there as for adults anyway who are seeing it. Us, it's supposed to be sort of a nostalgia fest, right? You see the Rainbow Road, and you're like, oh, it's the Rainbow Road. Oh, they're firing banana peels, that type of
It's
thing.
referential. It's
It,
highly referential.
yeah, and it's for that kind of thing that's going on, I think, right now over the last 10 years, is as our generation is reaching middle age, a lot of artists are putting up kind of nostalgia movies, things that you can reflect on your youth and kind of sigh and remember that. And I think this movie is trying to work in that genre as well.
So this is the Forrest Gump of our generation, is what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, well,
I
yeah, I
mean,
think a
like
lot.
I'm not like you're not even that. We're not that far off.
Luigi says a life is like a box of Goombas.
But it's basically like,
Mm.
for people, in 1994, if you were going to give them their nostalgia film, you had to go and give them all of their protest days and show them all that kind of stuff. For our generation, it's like show them all the video games they played as children.
Mhm. Yeah. It's yeah, which is fine, I suppose. I don't. I found the movie kind of a little boring. let's
Boring. I
let's
mean,
be a
nothing. It's
little.
predictable. It's boring. Nothing.
Mhm.
I mean, that's like a lot of kids' movies are that way. So it's like but it's not it's not bad. It made sense. It was colorful. It was cute.
I liked hearing the Mario music set to the movie in a big orchestral way. There's the one scene where they're approaching the castle, and there's tons of gags in there that are references that were kind of irritating. But the music brought back so many good memories of playing specific parts of the games where that music was playing. So I did enjoy that little sequence where they're approaching the castle. But otherwise, yeah, this movie was kind of tough to get through.
Mhm. Why do you feel it was tough to get through?
I just like we're saying, it's a kids movie for kids, which I enjoy animated films. I love all the Pixar films, Ghibli movies, a lot of the Disney movies. Like Frozen is a great movie, but the Illumination movies, there's something about them that it's like a little bit like Looney Tunes gone wrong. Like everything is squishy and stretchy. They do the slow mo thing a few too many times. they're just making jokes like, "Oh, look, he's getting pounded now," but it doesn't. I don't. It doesn't quite work as a
They're
tone or
too
anything.
frenetic, and I guess that's what I mean by shouty. I don't even just mean the volume of the characters. Like it's just it's the frenetic, just like okay, we're just gonna go into this next scene and things are just gonna be like, "Bah," and yeah, we're just gonna throw things and things are gonna blow up and we're gonna have a big, I'm sort of like, yeah, I feel like this could be a little more subtle. Like, and again, it's a kid's cartoon, but there are better, more subtle, clever ways of doing that. And this thing just took a totally safe road. It did exactly what basically there's nothing shocking, there's nothing unusual. It's got the exact classic, Campbell hero of 10,000 faces kind of storyline. Like it has no, it doesn't take any risks, and that's still fun. I mean, it was fine.
I also really like they put Iwata's name in the credits. He was the last president of Nintendo, so it was really nice that they put former president. You guys know Iwata at all?
I don't think so.
He was president through kind of the Wii, the Wii U, 3DS, right up until the
He was the
Switch.
one who is president in the time of the book that we were
Yeah,
reading.
he's the
He,
Oh,
last
he's
okay.
he's
president.
only
Yeah.
been
Great,
made
great.
president for a little bit, I think, at the
Hmm.
time that the book we were reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes from his is on my business card, it says I'm the president of Nintendo. In my mind, I'm a programmer, but in my heart, I'm a gamer. So he had some really cool philosophies. And if you get a chance, Iwata Asks is his biography. Highly recommend that book. That was pretty cool. I did want to ask, when you're adapting a game to a movie, what can't they adapt from the game? Right? They got the images in there, they got the characters in there, whatever that means from a video game. They got the music. They have the story. I guess the Mario games don't have a lot of story. It's kind of weird to try to put a story around it. I guess it's fine. But what can you not take from a game and put into a movie? So what's missing that you can't from any game?
With the freedom, there's a sort of delusion of freedom, I guess, in these games, right? Where um, in some games there's more freedom than others, but in Mario, it's the story is sort of a loose. It's very loose, right? It's get over there. I mean, that's basically this, or get as many points as possible, depending on what type of gamer you are. So there isn't that kind of freedom or that kind of sense of excitement in response to these stimulations are you can't really replicate that in a movie except in probably the most ham-handed way, which you don't want to do. Probably I was reading about a play. It was one of these, like a Brechtian play. It was a friend of Brecht who had made this play where like the audience can come up and then decide what to do about this social problem. And so they invite the audience on stage and try and act out the social problem in order to give the audience the freedom to correct the social injustice in the world or something like that. And like, oh, it's freaking miserable. I would
I went to a
hate.
play like that in London. It was
Oh,
painful. It was
yeah.
painful. And I would have walked out at intermission, except it took place in like literally subway tunnels underneath London. And I'm like, there's literally no way for me to get out of here. I would have to wander back through a subway tunnel by myself. It was, yeah.
It's very
Yeah.
Ghostbusters.
Ugh.
Yeah, I agree, Tom. Right. One thing you can't adapt is the player's agency. Right. One
Yeah.
of the things
That's what
video
is
game. Yep.
exactly, that was gonna be my answer, was agency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what else I think I liked about what you talked about, Tom, is not only the player's agency, but that dopamine rush of either doing the right thing in the game or whatever that addictive quality of video games is.
You're participating in it in a
It's
completely different
play.
way.
I mean, that's what they keep
Yeah.
saying. I mean, that's the big thing with Nintendo is play. You can't play in a movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
I was the games. I don't really. I played Mario. Mario is not my game of choice. My game of choice is usually Bethesda games. That would be my sort of bread and butter. Would be where I would go. And so the thing I like about those games is it, the stories are usually pretty weak, and that's not. There is a story. There's usually some sort of world-ending MacGuffin you have to kind of go after, but the thing that I enjoy about those games is is actually place. I think video games can do place a lot better than a lot of movies. There are movies that can do it. Lord of the Rings, I think, really does give you a sense of place. We talked about that. It's really hard to do though in a movie. Video games can do that really well, and it's because you can walk around and turn and look and go up over a hill and see something in the distance and walk towards it and look around it. I enjoy those aspects of them. Or, the other games I do like quite a bit is the BioShock games, especially, the original 2, I think are quite atmospheric. And I like the atmosphere of them. I'm not really like a horror movie fan, but I do like those games. There's like the sense of claustrophobia. I mean, you actually do feel it in a way that most movies don't actually capture. They make you feel uncomfortable, but they don't make you feel what the character you feel like you're watching it. Whereas sometimes in BioShock there is certainly a feeling of it's not just like a jump scare. There are certainly certain moments where something, like you'll see something lying on the ground and then turn away and then look back and be like, "Oh, it's gone." And you just kind of like, "Shoot, boy, this is bad." And you actually, I never think that in a horror movie. Like anytime you see that, you're like, "Of course that's what happened." Where so there's a sense of involvement in games, and I think that's the thing, and that's what makes it a game and not a movie. So that's why it's really hard to adapt them well into movies. I think the thing that a lot of them rely on is what we've kind of mentioned, which is like even the original the 93 movie does this, where they make references to things from the games, and then the 2023 one really does this, makes lots of references to the game to remind the players of their experience playing them, but it can't ever get even close to it. It's just a reminder of something it's sort of it's almost a problem. It's reminding you of the thing that's not there. So it's sort of like you're drawing attention to it, but can they, if you watch that entire movie and they never made a reference to any of the games and it was just like a straightforward movie plot, it would be a disaster. I mean, that is essentially what the 93 movie did. It'd be a disaster. It doesn't matter whether they, kept the exact cartoon things. If they weren't making references to the games, I don't think that movie would be very fun.
So going back to what you're saying about Bioshock versus horror movies, the other thing with a horror movie, the movie's going to keep going, no matter what you do. In Bioshock, if the next room seems creepy, you have to press forward to walk into that room. So you have to decide to do that, which I guess is a little bit of the agency thing, but I think it's another thing. Like the game will stop if you walk away. The movie's going to keep playing unless you actively stop it.
Yeah, you make the story go on in any game. And maybe it's not a narrative, maybe it's just a story, which is, a reason to go from A to B. But yeah, you have to compel it forward. I guess it's this kind of idea of if you are sort of like passively relating to something, like passively observing something, then it's narrative. If you're a participant in the creation of something, then it's game, right? That seems to be partially a designation point.
It's the one thing I like to bring up all the time is baseball's a game. So are you actively participating in the story of this baseball game? It just sounds weird
No,
when you
because you're
say it that
watching
way.
it.
But
No, no,
somebody
you're a
is.
player. You're a
But a
player in it.
person is. Watching Twitch doesn't mean that Twitch isn't a game. It's just I'm not playing the game. I'm watching the game. Same thing with Twitch. It just means that the thing I'm watching is a game.
Well, I think you guys are missing. So I'm saying if you're a player in baseball, are you participating in the story of baseball? It's weird to
I think
use the
you
word
could describe
story
it
in
that
that
way, but
case.
I wouldn't say the baseball game has a narrative. You could say there's the story of the game. It's the people describe it that way. The story of the game, like yeah, he pitched 7.2 innings. He gave up 4 earned runs. Blah blah blah. But would you describe it as a narrative? No, because a narrative is a shaped thing. Um, and yeah, so I think that holds.
Another thing that I think is really either impossible or hard to adapt from games is a little hard for me to describe, so bear with me here for a second. But when I'm playing a game, good games have good physics or a good feel to them. Bad games, they might be too floaty. Maybe when I jump, it takes too long for him to actually jump. They're not responsive, they don't react, they're not snappy. I try to compare it to like driving a good car, which I don't think I've ever done, but I imagine there's cars out there that feel really good to drive for whatever reason. The steering is responsive, the engine just drawers. I don't know.
I
Whatever
get
it
that
is.
feeling with certain shopping carts. There's certain
Oh,
shopping carts that
there
I'm
are
like, oh,
definitely
this
good
one is a
shopping
really
carts
good
out
one.
there.
There is nothing, yeah,
The wheels are pointing in the same direction.
yeah.
While we're on it, rolly chairs actually. Also, there's a huge difference in, rolly chairs. But
That
I
that's also
think
true.
I think what you're getting at is it's the immersive quality of it. Film,
I would you say driving a car is immersive? So no, I don't think I
no,
am.
but it can be, actually. There can be a certain level of an immersive quality in the sense that, for the most part, if I'm driving a car, I'm just using it to get from point A to point B. If I had my druthers, I probably wouldn't be doing it. But there are, I bet, if you're like interested in driving and you get into a really good car, the actual process of driving the car is an enjoyable experience to you. And that's what I mean. So like with games, we don't play them if they're not immersive to us the way we would drive a car, because we don't have to. So if it's a bad one, we just don't do it. Whereas when they're really good, there's almost an element where the thing you are doing in and of itself feels good regardless of what it is. And I think that's true of really probably a really good car. If you're really into that, there's the experience of doing the thing itself is enjoyable in itself.
And I think that's true with games with rules, where I think where the physics of a game is in part the rules of the game. Where if the game is very responsive, um, then the physics of the game are adjusted in such a way, or the rules of the game are adjusted in such a way that you're more connected to it or gain more pleasure from it. Like I can't imagine hitting a mouse pad and then waiting half a second for the character to jump. That would just be utterly frustrating because the physics aren't responsive to you. The rules are not suited to fun. I mean, it would be like playing a card game where you just cannot figure out what this hand or that hand is worth. It's why poker is fun because poker's fairly simple game and the rules are pretty clear and yet despite the rules being simple and clear, it leads to an immense amount of complications and trying to figure out what are the odds of this or that happening. And I think that's where the ability of a game to lock you in, and if we want to call it immersive or what have you, is not really the story of Mario getting up the ramps to get to the monkey to get the princess or whatever it is. It's just the game physics or the game rules are disciplining, and you can slot into that disciplining structure really well.
There is an element. It bothers me because I've heard people say it with regards to Bethesda games all the time. And in one of the things, it drives me crazy with it because, Tom, I don't know if you played any Bethesda games.
I'm not sure what they are.
They're, the most famous ones they have are called Elder Scroll games or Fallout games. Those are the most famous kind
I've
of series.
heard of Fallout at least, but I haven't
Yeah, so
haven't played
I
them.
think they're making one of them, I think, into a Netflix series, but or at least there was talks about it. But anyway, what they're known for are making massive, like, wide open worlds where you just kind of wander, and that's what I really like to do, is just kind of wander, and it's really fun. Like, especially like sometimes you'll wander over a desert and be like, oh, there's a statue up there. Like, I don't know what that is. Let me go find it. And sometimes there's nothing there. Sometimes there's a huge long quest line you're gonna have to go follow. It's very entertaining, and I just enjoy that sort of exploration. But people always complain because Bethesda games are known for having wonky bugs where you'll just like be standing there and suddenly like some person will just like get stuck in a wall and they do the whole thing, and and it's sort of, people will always complain and they'll go, oh, I can't stand it, it ruins my immersion. And I'm like, did you really, you didn't actually think any of this was real. You were not actually immersed in this. Like, I get it. The bug is, if it was constantly happening, I would be more annoyed by just the sound and the kind of, I'd be like, well, I have to like reboot it or whatever it is. Like, it would be annoying for a technical reason, but it doesn't affect my immersion. I am shocked that they get any of this to work at all. So I have no problems if there's a little bit of wonkiness to it. It's not affecting my immersive quality. I prefer that they have built a really good world that I can kind of, exist in. I don't need immersion, and I think that that's a weird term that people give to video games, because I don't. But I do think there is an element of, maybe the better way to think of it is not necessarily immersion. It's just frictionless ability to play it. is almost like the less friction there is in your experience between it, the better. That often makes for the better game. But this idea of like they have to be immersive, I don't think that's quite right. I've never thought of myself as actually being there.
Yeah, and what I was saying too was more like responsive. Is the physics of the game responsive to my, ability to jack into it, however it is, through controller or through the Wii or what have you. And I think having like clear physics just makes the game more fun. I don't know, I don't know if you're
No, I
like
get
you're
what
saying, Pat, like
it's
you're not, you don't think you're actually there, but I mean, it even goes back to like
it's the
why.
same thing as rules. Like it has to have consistent rules. If sometimes I, do one thing and it results in me jumping, 6 feet in the air, but other times I do it and for whatever reason here it results in me jumping into a tree. It's sort of like, well, this is annoying. I can't quite figure out what's going on here. There has to be a level of consistency and rules to it.
Yeah, and I think that's what the physics of a game do that. Well, like this suit is higher than this suit does it in cards.
For me, it's how connected I feel to the game. How much does it feel like an extension of what I'm doing right now, as opposed to I'm frustrated because I really expected the character to do this, but they did something else. And I think a lot of Nintendo games, a lot of Miyamoto games, a lot of Konami games, I think they absolutely nail that. The game feels like an extension of my thoughts. I'm completely connected, completely one with the game, for lack of a better word. And I don't know if you can adapt that into a movie. That's one idea that I think games stand on their own, particularly video games, because they're real time. As sports can do this too, I'm sure. Um, but I think video games you can really connect with because of that real time and possibly very responsive response.
Yeah, there's a live element, I guess you're talking about that, right? That this is a way you can participate in something live in which you don't know the outcome, right? Like it's still entertain. Like there's very few things that are entertaining where there isn't a set outcome, and sports do that too. I mean, if you watch a football game, like anybody can win, anything can happen. It's kind of true, and that's what makes it exciting and fun. And that's why there's people who will watch sports for hours but never go to movies. They're just not movie people or readers because they like that sort of uncertainty and they feel connected to it because of that uncertainty, that sort of liveness to it that they're able to participate in. And again, it's not immersion as you're saying, Pat, but it is a form of um I don't want to say participation is the wrong word because video games you are actually participating in when you're doing it. But both video games and live sports events um, are relying on uncertainty in order to get you there. I think that actually the book points this out. It's similar to slot machines, right? Where there's an uncertain reward schedule. You get rewards at uncertain levels, and that's how successful games work because they become addictive because you want to get the reward and it's not planned. You don't know when the reward is coming. And I think sports works in that way too. You're sitting there waiting for the reward, waiting for your team to do really well, and maybe it comes, maybe it doesn't, but you're not going to know when.
And I mean, this might also help to explain part of the reason why adapting games into movies is so difficult. It's almost like trying to adapt a football game into a movie. You can adapt something around the, but like you can make, obviously there are sports movies, but that's not the same thing as adapting a football game into a movie. It's almost the same thing that we're kind of getting running into here with video games, is that it's like trying to adapt a video game into a movie. The medium is really different. Like again, they're audio, they're visual, but so are sports. It doesn't mean that they go together well.
Yeah. And it's usually you need a hook or something like that, right? Like Rudy is often the sports movies that for some reason every gym teacher made you watch that in health class. I don't know. Maybe that was just my generation, but I watched a movie like I think 3 times in various health classes through high school and middle school. But the idea of Rudy is this kind of the story is like, does this guy get to play on the team or not? It's not the standard. affair with sports, and not like new sports movies, like Moneyball and things like that. They take the game entirely out of it. It's a sports movie where you see actually very little sports happening, because they realize. I think why Moneyball works is they kind of realize, that watching fake sports kind of sucks. Let's try and find another aspect to this world that's interesting. And actually, the Moneyball story is very interesting. It's, probably far more interesting than the Oakland A's have been in about 15 years, um, 10 years maybe. But yeah, yeah, I think you're right, Bet. I think that's like why it doesn't adapt well.
No, I think there's I can't I think I asked this question once really early on in this, and I said, talking about, because I said I don't think there's any good examples of like movies that have worked their way backwards into good books, like either there's plenty of good books and bad books that have made into good movies. Are there any movies, good or bad, that have made into good books? I don't think they're there. And I think I asked during that, are there any examples of books that have been turned into sort of video games without the movie interlude in between there? And one I thought of later on, which is a game I actually really do enjoy, is the Witcher games. They did those are based on books, and they made them into games first. Um, and that I mean, I've seen the Netflix series. I watched the first season of it. It's pretty good, but I think the difference there is that they specifically said we are not adapting the video games into the Netflix series. They said we are adapting the books into the Netflix series.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's so basically there are essentially there is no references to the game. There might be some Easter egg kind of references in there, but I think there's it is not about the video games. And there are some differences between the books and the video games. So they were very clear on that there will be differences. It does not follow the same thing. So that works quite well if you are going to just go say this is not based on the video game. So you might be able to make, and I know there's other movies like the Mortal Kombat ones and things like that. Like you might be able to make it work if you just said this is not an adaptation of the video game. This is an adaptation of the source material that produced the video game. You would almost have I think it's the only way you can really get it to work without it just being a reference fest.
Yeah, and it's odd. You'd think that there'd be more opportunity for this to work well, because I think what really good games do is they do kind of work with some archetypes. Not necessarily, but they can, where you have a sort of somewhat blank character, and you could kind of fill that in with a good actor and put that blank character into a really interesting story. But it's not really why we buy the video game. And so the fact that you're using a character from the game is sort of incidental if you want to make a good movie. It's just basically it's marketing for the movie, and then you have to come up with a really good narrative on top of that. So maybe why it doesn't really work well, because any kind of character you bring in is going to be kind of superfluous. I don't know. The Laura Croft movies, were they worth anybody's time?
The Angelina Jolie ones are just kind of goofy. To compare them to Indiana Jones would be very unfair to Indiana Jones. The most recent one without Angelina Jolie was,
Lisa Vicklander, I think her
is
name
that who it
is.
was? Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a step up. It was a different thing.
Oh,
The Angelina Jolie ones knew they were goofy and they were being goofy. It's almost like a '90s Bond movie. But the newer one had a little more Indiana Jones to it in a good way.
oh, okay.
But in some ways, I mean, I don't. Again, I haven't seen them, so I can't say. But it seems like they're doing sort of more what the Witcher one was doing, which is we're not actually taking the game and turning this into a movie. We're just taking Lara Croft, the character, and putting her into a movie that is not based on a game. Like this is not the game being put on the screen. It is Lara Croft, a character that happened to make an appearance in a game, appearing in
Mhm.
a movie.
Yeah, that's the thing. You can only take the character, I think, because the joy of the game is, like you're saying, that connectivity, right? Which I think has something to do with good rules or good physics plus uneven reward schedules. But with a movie, if you're going to adapt that, you have none of that. So all you do is you have a character that better be interesting enough, or I guess in the case of Laura Croft, look in a certain way so that she can kind of carry a movie or draw the attention of people who play the game to come to the movie. I mean, to me, it comes off as just marketing for a movie. Like, I want to do a jungle movie. I'll put Laura Croft in it because that will be the reason that people will go to it.
And it's a little tricky because a lot of games are designed that the lead character is a Mario, is a Mickey Mouse, and they have no defining attributes
Mhm.
because the game designers want the player to feel like they are
There.
Mario. Therefore, Mario can't have any attributes. Is slightly, every character has some character, but that's kind of the heart of every most
Mhm.
JRPGs. It's the silent protagonist who woke up one day, doesn't remember his past because the player is showing up not knowing the past. So you have a lot of that going on. So then if you're going to put that into a movie, you have a non-character as your lead.
Yeah, but if the character, I don't know, looks in a certain way or is distinct, you could have a really good actor fill that character up with his or her charisma, right? So you need a star, right, to kind
Right,
of
but
pull this off.
I think almost no matter what, the fans are going to be upset if it's not their
Yeah,
version of the, right? That's the risk you run
yeah,
with.
yeah, and it's maybe why none of these have been successful.
I mean, if they went out, I mean, there's some of these, just thinking about some of the games that tend to have more narrative background to them, like again, a BioShock, let's go and say. BioShock has a significant amount of narrative that's, and a lot of games have this. They have a significant amount of narrative that's occurred before the game. They often will do that, they start in medias res. So in a game, it's really hard to get that information back to the player. That's why, the sort of the joke being the random documents and audio logs, like half of them just have to, like, you just that's how they fill it all in for you. Or some characters will kind of drop information to you, and it's hard to justify why they're telling you unless you happen to have just dropped into this world. So they're often doing something like that. If you were to take a BioShock movie though and say, okay, I don't know if they're planning one or not. I thought I heard somewhere, but I think you hear it all the time. But if they did make a BioShock movie, you could make one, but the better movie would not be the game. The better movie would be the things that happened before the game, because there's tons of characters there and there's tons of narrative and things that happened there that in no way involve the game per se and the player you play in the game. So you could make a really interesting thing of that. And there's plenty of games that fall into that category. Um, but yeah, I think if you went and took Skyrim and said, I'm gonna take Skyrim and make the game into a movie, it would be boring as balls. Like it would just be like no one would care. It's not a particularly interesting story and it's not told in a particular interesting way. And the only real draw to it is the fact that you get to do it. Um, so it would be there's something weird about it.
Resident Evil, I believe the movies do what you were saying, Pat, where there's a backstory and they enact the backstory as the movie. Is that correct, KJ?
So I was actually going to bring up the Resident Evil movies because I enjoyed them. I think I enjoyed
I
all
This
five
is
of
the
them.
honestly,
this is why they
I
work.
enjoyed
I
them
mean,
too.
this is the
Yeah.
way you do it. If you're gonna do a video
Mhm.
game, is how you have to do it.
Yeah, they're not good movies. They're enjoyable.
But they're pretty good zombie movies, right? The Resident Evil movies.
Yeah, they're campy. They're not particularly well performed, and they also don't connect together. Oddly enough, like they
Right.
feel like they almost feel like stock characters that are occasionally dropped into new circumstances. Yeah, but they're okay. Except I think two and three aren't that good. Two is pretty, yeah, two is pretty awful. But yeah, but yeah, I think that is maybe that's a good idea. Like you have to adapt the story that caused this to happen, because a lot of games are about like you have to be a main character who, like you're saying, KJ, you have to figure out what the narrative is. You have to be alien to this world, so you always have to have amnesia or what have you, and stumble upon a paper, and so that
Hmm.
type of thing. I remember the old Sierra games. Did anybody play those?
The King's Quest, Space Quest.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Those
Yeah.
were those are fun, and they had clear stories. The only problem with those is most of the story is you finding objects and putting them together in random orders, so
Oh,
that
adventure games. I love
yeah,
adventure
adventure
games.
games,
I
yeah,
still
which
play
have
those.
they're certainly very fun, but I don't know how. And I actually think like some of the world is pretty imaginative. I think King's Quest Six is a really cool island nation that they lay out with a lot of diversity of kind of beasts and things like that. But I can't imagine transforming all of that into a plot, right?
No, here's what would happen. So right, King's Quest 6, the movie, you'd get to the final act, the character would be just about to do what he's supposed to do. He would turn to the camera and say, I should have picked up the silver pin in the first act.
Hmm.
And then the movie would end because he
You can't go on.
he didn't get the silver pin,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, which would be insufferable. Yeah, but another thing I was interested in is, are there ways that video games can do narratives that movies can't? And I don't mean like um, immerse you or connect you or offer you a kind of a rush or whatnot, an experience that a movie can. Yes, video games can offer you an experience a movie can. Can they offer you a narrative that a movie can't, or that they can do better than a movie? And I put forward something you mentioned, KJ, which I've played, the Stanley Parable, which I think
Oh.
does its job in a way that I don't think could work in a movie.
Yeah, I completely agree. So, audience, in the Stanley Parable, spoilers, so please skip ahead a few minutes if you haven't played it and plan on playing it. But
It's
you
only like an hour, so it shouldn't.
Well, I don't know, Tom. So in this game, you kind of start at an office desk, and you can stand up. You start walking around, and the narrator says, "Are you Stanley in that game? Is that why it's called Stanley?" He says, "Stanley's going to go to the meeting down the right hallway." And if you go down the right hallway, the narrator kind of keeps telling you what you're going to do. But if you go left, he gets a little frustrated and is like, Stanley, you're supposed to be going down the right hallway. And as you're playing, you're either doing what you're supposed to do or not. And if you don't do what you're supposed to do, the world starts to fall apart in very strange ways. The first time I tried to play through it, I ended up in an apartment that started filling up with space debris, like satellites and things, until the apartment was so full I couldn't move. And then I guess that was the end of the game. But it's a game that feels like it has no boundaries because you can't just put your hand on the wall and walk around the maze like you can in most video games. This one, it messes with your head. So I don't know, Tom, if you could see the whole game in an hour. I don't know how much is actually in there to play through all the different threads.
Yeah, I think maybe the original's out and they kept building upon it. But the idea is there's one avenue where if you betray, so you're in conflict with the narrator. Um, and the narrator is sort of narrating a story, and you're presumably going to follow the story. And if you don't follow the story, and you're completely alone, there's no other characters here, you're just in an office building. You don't know why you're there or whatnot. But if you don't follow the narrator, either good things or bad things or weird things can happen. There's one version where like you can actually achieve freedom from the narrator, like you keep not listening to him and make certain decisions, and that lets you actually leave the office building and have freedom. Um, there's also like there's one where if you turn computers on and off in a certain order, you go to heaven. You just appear in heaven, and there's just a bunch of buttons for you to press. That's what heaven is for the. But it seems like they're looking more at this idea of people sort of following a path through life. It's not a particularly complicated philosophy, but we've all probably heard it in a pop version or whatnot, which is like you sort of feel compelled to follow a path through your life. It's no mistake this takes place in a sort of generic office building. And it's that type of thing, and sort of the meaninglessness of following a well-trod path and the kind of tension someone feels when kind of going off of that. And I think that the game is giving you that experience, and it's that message or that idea or that philosophy isn't particularly complicated. I mean, I think it's pretty much pop by this point, but the game is really unsettling. I don't know if you've played it, Pat.
No, it sounds
Yeah,
intriguing actually.
yeah, it's an intriguing thing. Yeah, but it's really kind of creepy, and I think KJ, you had that experience. You said,
Oh yeah, it feels like there's no boundaries. It feels like you're not safe. You don't know what you can and can't do. We watched the trial. The last episode was a trial. It feels a little bit like being that guy in the trial, not knowing what's going to be through the next door.
mhm. Yeah, it's sort of an absurdist world, but I don't
You can't
think
make a movie out of that. It would be a
you can't make movie.
disaster.
Yeah,
It'd
Yeah,
be
I
a
agree.
disaster. I mean, it's almost like it's like the Matrix when he's like getting his like you need to step out on the windowsill and scooch, like that thing, and he doesn't do it. But it's like that doesn't, that's almost what that kind of sounds like.
Mhm. Yeah, but in order to, I mean, in order to kind of even get that, what the game is actually saying, I think, is far less interesting than the feeling of experiencing it through the game. Because when you're playing, you just don't know what, like, like, what am I supposed to do? Why is this guy getting angry at me? Is something gonna get me? Like, it is just a very odd experience, and that's the power of it. And yeah, I don't think you can convert that into a movie.
Yeah.
Maybe more theater, because you do immersive theater, um, but even there,
I'm
it's
picturing
you.
Stanley Parable, The Escape Room. Oh man, that
Yeah,
would be.
but even there,
I mean,
like,
even that interactive theater is usually more gimmicky than it is
mhm,
effective,
yeah,
right?
yeah, because it's ultimately you're safe. That's the thing. Like ultimately, yeah, it feels kind of silly, and that kind of cuts the whatever the fear of it out. Um,
So yeah, I agree, Tom. Stanley Parable, I don't think you could adapt into a
mhm.
movie and capture the heart of it. I had another experience with a video game that I wanted to bring up. Pat, you had mentioned Chrono Trigger before, and there's a scene in Chrono Trigger where you are in the past for one of the kids' um, mom is on a conveyor belt and being brought into a machine and is gonna die, and you can save her by putting in the password. And the password, at least in the American version on the DS, was Laura. Lara. But it doesn't tell you how to put that in. So as this mom is like approaching her death, you're like getting nervous, you're getting scared, right? It's this narrative. And finally I realize all I have to do is press the buttons on the DS. Lara. The L button on my DS did not work. So I was pressing it over and over again as she's getting closer and closer, and then she died. So I don't know you could have that kind of a narrative without the tension of I could have saved her if I had a DS that had a working L
Yeah.
button, and I was
There's
Yeah.
also one of my favorite video game experiences was playing, it seems like it's a similar thing here. And again, you can't do this. It just wouldn't work in a film. There's a great sequence in one of the Elder Scroll games where there's a whole sequence you can do where you become like an assassin basically, and you're given different missions, and some of them are goofy and some of them are kind of fun, and you can find fun ways to kill people, and it's sort of like Assassin's Creed before Assassin's Creed. Um, but so one of the so you kind of going through these missions, and then there's this one point where you're fairly high up in the organization, and you become like the personal assassin of one of the leaders of the organization. And he's like, again, it's just like it's meant to be sort of macabre and dark, and he's kind of a fun character. And he basically says, I'll never see you again, I'm just going to give you dead drops. So you start getting these dead drops, and you start doing all these assassinations from all these letters that he's leaving for you. And so you do like 6 or 7 of them, during the sequence of this thing. And finally he does, he finds you, and he basically is like, what the hell are you doing? And you're like, what? And it turns out if you actually look at the letters, the penmanship changes halfway through them,
oh wow.
Mhm.
and somebody has been slipping you false dead drops. They've been changing them, and you've actually been assassinating all of the other head members of the organization. And so he basically thinks you've gone completely rogue. But it's a great reveal, but it's sort of like it's the reason it is effective is because it's like, oh, I screwed up. Like, and you actually do. And again, it's fascinating because not that you could do anything about it, but you can see that the penmanship changes. If you've been paying attention, you would have noticed that something was wrong. So there's a really cool element where I remember being like, you actually feel responsible for it. And it's a very effective game moment. Film can't do that because I wouldn't watch it and be like, oh, I can't believe I did that. I would probably be watching it going, oh, for God, how does, Nicolas Cage not get that this is clearly, something has changed here. The music is different. I would be more annoyed with the character for not having figured it out. Whereas in this instance, I feel quite responsible for it. So things like that are very good ways that games can actually kind of effectively and you can't do that in film. I don't think those kind of that where the agency, your own actions actually make you feel responsible for what actually is happening. Film can't do that.
Yeah. Another one, actually, Pat, that you brought up, Bioshock. So, spoilers for Bioshock. Skip ahead if you haven't played and intend to play the first one. The whole time you have a guy on a walkie-talkie. I think it's Frank Fontaine is kind of telling you what to do, and he.
No, it's Atlas in the beginning. He
Oh, it's
becomes
Atlas
Frank
telling you.
Fontaine.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Atlas at the beginning.
Okay.
But
Atlas.
Atlas, would you
Would you
kindly pick up that
kindly?
radio? Would you
Would you
kindly pick up that
kindly?
radio?
He's saying this over and over again, and you don't really realize it when you're playing, but he's saying, "Hey, would you kindly do this? Would you kindly go here? Would you kindly?" And when you get to the end, you realize either I forget, are you drugged? You've been
You've been
programmed
genetically conditioned, yeah.
that if
You've been
somebody
mentally
says,
conditioned.
"Would you kindly?" you have to do it. And again, because you're the one doing it, similar to,
Well, it's a
um,
great game mechanic because when he does it, you can't move the game forward until you do what he told you to do. And the thing he told you to do is like, he'll be like, "Would you kindly pick up that radio?" And the radio will just show in gold, and you can't do anything until you pick up
pick it
that
up.
radio. So it's like a game mechanic. It's a
Hmm.
convention of games where they do
Right.
that all the time. Somebody will be like, would you go pick up that wrench?" And you're like, "Okay, I'll go pick up the wrench." And you just do it mindlessly, but they actually take that and give it meaning.
Yeah.
Mm.
So then that narrative felt, again, because it felt like I was doing it, you felt like you were tricked, like, oh, am I programmed to do this because I play video games? Another game I have not played, but I've heard people talk about is Metal Gear Solid 3, I believe. So in Metal Gear Solid, you play a operative, kind of like if James Bond was sneakier and stealthier, and you can go through these games, at least the third one, without killing anybody. You can just make them pass out and stealthily make your way through the game, or you can shoot and kill them. In Metal Gear Solid 3, when you get to the end and you finish the game, as the credits are rolling, every single NPC you killed walks towards you in this field with the bullet shot wherever you shot it. So you kind of feel like,
Pretty good.
oh, jeez,
That's
why did I do it?
Mm.
And I don't remember what podcast this is, audience. So if you listen to this other podcast, you're going to get a repeat story. But this guy shot everybody in the same place in the genitals. So everybody that walked towards. But another narrative piece you couldn't. I mean, maybe we're getting kind of loose with what is narrative at this point. But another narrative piece you couldn't put into
It's
a
a
movie.
it's a genre convention that doesn't translate, right? I don't know if it's narrative or story, or how we're using these terms, but it wouldn't translate well, probably. Yeah, whatever makes this genre thing. Um, is there a game that would just make a good movie?
Well, I was gonna ask if you guys have seen any of the, I'll say, 4 Final Fantasy movies.
They made Final
Yeah, but
Fantasy
Final
movies?
Fantasy games almost are movies.
I've not played them. I cannot figure out what it is. Like when I keep going online and trying to like watch them or read the plot description, and I always come away massively confused as to
I
what.
tried. I tried with one of them, and I'm like, man, this is painful. Someone once said they were like, "Oh, if you play it for like 40 hours, it actually gets interesting." I'm like, "Oh."
I've played 1 through 10 too. And in general, the plots they're ridiculous. They're not coherent. You could tell they're written by a bunch of people who nobody sat down and made a coherent plot. But the first movie is not based on any of the games. The Spirits Within. It's not a good movie. It's kind of tough to watch. The second movie, Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, takes place, I think, I don't know, 10 years after Final Fantasy VII. So it's kind of a sequel to the game. So maybe that's kind of what we were saying before. It either needs to be an origin story of the game or a sequel to the game, so outside of the actual game. The next one I want to talk about is Final Fantasy Dad of Light or something like that. It's on Netflix. So
Like a dad, like a father?
like a father.
Okay.
So it's takes
That's
place
a
in
terrible name.
It's a really bad name. Yeah.
That's a terrible
Like
name.
I
Maybe
at
I have
first I
it
thought you
wrong,
said
but-
like I can't be dad. I mean, he must have said dadum or something like that.
No, Dad of Light. So it's so so Final Fantasy 14 is a MMO RPG, kind of like World of Warcraft. So in Dad of Light, the dad retires and wants to connect with his son. Because the dad used to play like Final Fantasy back in the day on the Famicom, so he's gonna play 14 with his son, but he doesn't really tell his son. So his son is obsessed with 14, and now his dad starts playing it. And it's based on a true life story. I believe the dad dies in it. So it's this real life story of this kid connecting with his dad, but he doesn't really realize it because the dad just hopped on this MMO and they were playing together. But again, the kid didn't really realize it. So that was an interesting way to take not a narrative of a video game, but take a video game story. Because I think a lot of the story from FF14 you experience through the TV show. So those are just some of the other Final
Yeah,
Fantasy
yeah,
adaptations.
you're sort of that's an interesting adaptation because you're not just doing the game, you're doing the gaming experience, um, which isn't, I guess, an adaptation so much as trying to, I don't know, recount or express what it feels like to play the game. What do you mean you get the plot of Final Fantasy 14 in it? It's just because they're discussing it a lot?
Well, no, there's a lot of game footage. A lot of the
No, it's just
show, you're
mhm.
watching the dad and the kid play the game. But again, the kid
Oh,
doesn't know
that's
that he's
intriguing. Yeah.
necessarily playing with his dad. He just
Mhm.
thinks it's whatever the screen name is.
Mhm.
So then
Hmm.
they're connecting in a different way because they're typing to each other, and the dad knows he's playing. But
Mhm. Dad of Light,
I'm pretty sure it's Dad
title
of
of the
Light. I've
year.
got to look this up.
Yeah.
I can't think, but to your question, I can't think of any just game that by itself would be an intriguing movie. Again, BioShock maybe, but again, games also always have these things where they'll just be like, and now, as they say, like you'll be just like, okay, you need to now go to the atrium, and you're like, okay, I'll go there, and then as soon as you get there, some thing happens where they're like, well, we got to extend this game out a little bit. And if that happened in a movie, it would just feel like thing after thing after thing, and a lot of games have that problem. Um, like Assassin's Creed are fun. I don't actually really like the games that much, but the first one at least had a really fun place. Sense of place that was really cool. The cities were well done and very detailed, and it had a certain sense of liveliness to it. But if you
Byzantium? Is that?
no, that one's Third Crusade.
Oh.
The first one's Third Crusade, so I mean, I guess sort of, but it's Acre, Jerusalem, and Damascus.
Hmm.
But it does have a cool sense of place, and there's some fun kind of my I just enjoyed more just like climbing all over the cathedrals and things like that. That's it's sort of fun. But if you translated that into a movie, man, it would be boring. Like it would be a terribly long movie, and none of those translate well into movies.
Hmm.
Like I think they made movies out of them, but I think they
I
must be
think so. Assassin's Creed with.
yeah, I think they definitely made movies out of it. And I'm like, that's another game series that just got so sucked into its own lore and just kind of went down a rabbit hole. So I don't know what they did with the movies, whether they actually were trying to follow the games themselves or not. But it's just there's a lot of games have that fundamental problem where the story often is even with games that are known for their story, they often just either have elements that if you tried to take them out, they would not this that the reason they're good is because it's interactive, otherwise the story is dumb, or they have so many just additional padding in there that the game might be fun, but the story would, again, it would just feel like they were padding it. So I don't think there's any that you could do it.
Yeah, MacGuffin Quest. MacGuffin Quest, the movie.
Yeah.
MacGuffin Quest 6. I have two. I have two ideas. I have two.
Okay, go
Okay.
for it.
So and they've tried right with Mortal Kombat, but I think you could make a good kung fu tournament movie with the Mortal Kombat characters. I think if you had the right, I mean, I don't know what Jackie Chan's doing these days. He's probably past his prime or whatever. But I think if you took Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, and a bunch of kung fu guys, you could make a good kung fu tournament movie.
You could, but it wouldn't be the game. It would be a different story. Wouldn't be the story because I
True,
think
true,
there is
true.
technically a narrative of Mortal
Yeah,
Kombat. I think
no,
it
you're
gives you
Mhm.
right.
that thing where it's like, but
You're
that's
right.
not that. If you
That's
took
not the
that
narrative.
story and
Yep.
turned it into a game, it would be, a movie would be boring.
And I guess another game I have an idea is going to fall into a similar category. Have you guys played Katamari Damacy?
Is that the one with the giant rolling ball?
Yes,
Yeah.
a kaiju movie based on Katamari Damacy, where the little prince is sent by royal prince, royal rainbow. Anyway, and at first he's just kind of rolling up a few things, and people are kind of like, "Oh, that's interesting," but eventually it gets so big, and you're gonna construct a kaiju type movie where the ball is the kaiju that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
That's a movie.
No,
No, it's not.
right. You're. I think
Oh,
I thought the question
oh,
was
you
what game could be adapted into a movie.
okay? But how would that be a movie?
It would. Well, you'd basically be repurposing Godzilla, so it would be
Oh, I see.
a
Yeah, it would
kaiju
be like a
movie.
Godzilla film. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I gotcha. Yeah, I thought it was like you could just keep rolling and rolling and rolling. Like, oh. Yeah, there's a lot of movies I used to play, like the Gabriel Knight games, which I think were also Sierra, which used a lot of movies, which never really work. The first Gabriel Knight actually had Tim Curry as the voice, but a lot of them had these kind of the actual film movies where like you would get to a certain point, and then you would see a movie enacted that showed you some necessary information or something like that. Um, and that always felt like this bizarre hybrid where it's like, okay, we're gonna stop doing the thing we want to do to watch this movie. There's this tax we have to pay to get back to the game.
That's essentially Final Fantasy 13 or whatever that one was that I watched, where it would just be like, okay, you have wandered down that corridor and dance fought your way through these things. Now sit and watch a 25-minute movie with fireworks. Like, that's why this thing is on 4 discs. It's like incredibly long.
uh, yeah. So like I guess it ends up being this kind of like hybrid problem where they try to put a movie into the game and you're not there for the movie. So it's just sort of, yeah, it's like something you have to get through in order to do the next puzzle. If you enjoyed Super Mario Brothers and are looking for more adaptations of Super Mario Brothers, check out the Lunchbox from the 80s, 90s, or any decade of the 2000s. You can rate and review this show anywhere fine podcasts are available. For those viewing in YouTube land, if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the Talking Studios channel for all our exciting content, and follow us on social media at Talking Studios. Check out other shows by Talking Studios, including Talking Pictures Trivia, where we explore movies through trivia, Keep Making Movies, where we explore micro-budget films, Limited Lexicon, where we play through text-based adventure games, and Get the Point, where we slowly reveal a movie poster and try to guess which movie poster it is. Got a question for us? Call the Talking Studios hotline at 201-467-8679 and leave a message. It may be featured on a future episode. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Adapt It, wherever fine podcasts are found. Join us next time when we discuss Jumanji and look at the 1995, 2017, and 2019 movies.
Wow, Talking Studios.
Next week, we'll be discussing Jumanji. Pat, if you could adapt Jumanji into any medium, what would it be?
So I mean, it's not that I would adapt it into a different medium. I would adapt it into like a different genre because I do think there is the the first movie sort of almost it feels like it really wants to be more of a horror movie. Like it really does. And they almost felt the need like they had because a lot of it is kind of horror. It's horrific. And they almost felt the need to add this like Home Alone-esque slapstick kind of humor in order to lighten it up, but it comes across tonally very strange. So I want someone just to actually go all in and make a true, just like an absolute horror story. Like if you got like M. Night Shyamalan to make, and I don't know what the twist would be at the end, we can discuss that. But like, what the M. Night Shyamalan version of Jumanji, because I feel like that's it's begging for that type of treatment.
Yeah, the Bloomhouse version.
Who's Bloom?
Oh wow. They do a lot of the newer horror movies that they're not low. Well, I guess they are a little low budget, but they're particularly creepy, and I think they would fit the board game really well.
Yeah, they're like medium budget.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah, they're not low, but they're
And that's the thing is like it would be better in some ways with that because of the sort of the horror of it is what you don't, again, it's sort of like the horror is what you don't see. The more powerful parts of the movie are when they're not just sort of having like the terrible CGI monkeys. But
Those monkeys did look especially bad.
for
I love
95,
them.
they probably were pretty good, but they were
Yeah,
really bad.
they were really bad at this.
KJ, what about you?
So I was thinking it might be a fun Dungeons and Dragons platform. So the dungeon master would be running the game, and would come up with the scenarios. Maybe there'd be some pre-canned ones in a book somewhere, but he would be coming up with the, oh, you rolled a blah blah blah. All right, here's the quick poem, and then the characters could be whoever they wanted. Maybe there was a few standard characters.
Good idea. It's a good
Right?
idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a few standard characters like in Welcome to the Jungle, right? You kind of picked the character you're going to be in the game. So maybe they can do whatever they like, and then you have interesting scenarios that are created. There's some rules, right? D&D still has rules, but I think it would be a fun, very creative, open way to have like a one-off night. So you didn't have to do a whole campaign. You could just kind of have these smaller one-off nights. What about you, Tom? How would you adapt Jumanji?
I went in a different direction. I saw Robin Williams, as a person who's recently acquired a beard, I saw Robin Williams trying to shave his beard. And you've had your beard for a little while, haven't you, Pat?
Oh yeah, since at least 2016.
Yeah, I am not a beard person. This is a new thing for me, and tremendously itchy. I think this is not going to last this week, but anyway. So seeing Robin Williams attempt to shave his beard and then cut his face, I thought, Jumanji the shaving kit. It could be a great Dad's Day gift. Get it for your father, and has little sprays and aftershave that have like the scent of the jungle. Very manly.
And does it have the little toilet paper squares?
Um, sure. Yeah, have little
Yeah.
toilet
Little
papers.
J's on
Yeah,
them.
if your dad's kind of incompetent, then there you go. Jumanji the shaving kit.
Smell like the jungle.
Yes.
Two of the three Jumanji movies are on Hulu at the time of this recording.